Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2. I'm Charlie Spears, host of Bitcoin Season 2, and with Blockspace Media. BTC Season 2 is produced by Blockspace Media. Check out our other stuff. But before that, I've got Alex B here with Ark Labs. They are building Ark, a protocol that really scales Bitcoin transactions. I'm just going to bring Alex up here. Alex, you welcome to the show. I'm so glad you get to finally be on Bitcoin Season 2.
I know, right? It's been a long time coming, but I think it's only right that I was on Gort a couple of months back during summer, I think, or early on. So good to be on here. Excited about our chat.
Yeah, and you're pretty tenured in the Bitcoin space, but we won't go through that. I mean, so Ark Labs raised $2.5 million from like Draper, Fulgur, Axiom. These are the big names, and then brought you on. And I see you guys putting out some interesting stuff. I'll just first call to action. Like, we've got you at our conference in Boston up next November 9th doing a workshop. I'm very excited to see that. Have you like thought through the workshop, or is this just the next thing on your list to figure out how to structure?
Yeah, no, we've got a couple of ideas, and I think one of the things that we want to be able to do, and we're kind of like trying to race towards, is being able to present the Ark node, which is what we announced basically last week in Amsterdam at the conference. And the Ark node is what I would call our sort of like go-to-market product for the Ark protocol. So, the team, Tiero, Marco, and have been working on the protocol on and off even before Ark Labs, and there was a previous iteration of a company that didn't pan out for different reasons, but effectively trying to refine the idea. I think it was originally proposed and pitched Ark, as kind of like almost this replacement for Lightning, right? And not a whole lot of people at the time, I think, were able to have a proper understanding of the technical nitty-gritty of the protocol. That's still the case today. But I think part of it was the way that it was communicated. And it feels like most people kind of like put it aside, leaving it for other people to kind of like figure it out. And I think that's where we're sitting at right now, which is we've done quite a lot of research into seeing what were the most practical use cases for Ark. Because one thing that we're continuing to realize is the protocol is a lot more flexible than it was sort of originally pitched as. So payment is one thing that it can do very well, and we can get into that. But there's a whole lot of stuff where we think Ark can help optimize pretty much every piece of Bitcoin ecosystem and infrastructure. But the Ark node specifically targets Lightning node operators. We've announced a partnership with Boltz. So effectively, Boltz is going to be sort of like the first company/service that is going to be integrating with the Ark protocol. And the idea is very simple. It's something that a lot of people are already familiar with. If you are familiar with Boltz and the service that they offer, specifically through the Liquid sidechain, right? And what people have been doing, because again, we know the issues that people have been facing with Lightning in terms of making the UX practical for users in terms of payments, in terms of cost and whatnot. And all of that was obviously accelerated earlier this year with the phenomenon, the Bitcoin Season 2, right? Kind of like blowing up the fees and effectively kind of like almost grinding Lightning to a halt for a couple of days. I mean, even our friends at Boltz had to shut down their services for a couple of days to try and sort of like mitigate some of the issues that they were encountering, because well, it turns out that Lightning, although a lot of this stuff happens off chain, sorry, you do need to be able to move liquidity around in those channels. And well, in so like the traditional architecture, that implies on-chain transaction. And so the moment on-chain transactions start getting extremely expensive, well, you run into that problem where, I have this screenshot of my Phoenix wallet from back in March or April, where it would have cost me like hundreds of dollars to be able to open like a 100,000 SAT channel for inbound liquidity. So people have been iterating on that problem because I think this is just part of the ecosystem and the infrastructure being very immature. One of the solution that came up is something that actually our founder Marco has kind of had been championing in the background for quite some time. Marco originally had a company called Vulcan Vulture Venture, sorry, and they had been sort of like doing work on the light and liquid protocol for quite some time. And so one of the cool thing that they realized pretty early on is you're able to do those submarine swaps between liquid and on-chain Bitcoin, or in this case, Lightning. So, and one of the use case, and probably the single biggest use case of liquid, at least amongst Bitcoiners. I know some people are playing around with it to issue assets and whatnot, but certainly one of the most popular one right now is this idea that you're able to use your Bitcoins on liquid to be able to do swaps and therefore rebalance your channel without having to incur the cost of on-chain Bitcoin. And the idea with the Ark node and the Ark protocol is that, well, we can do the exact same thing without having some of the trust trade-offs that are inherent to the liquid sidechain. Being a federated model, sort of like a large multi-sig where you trust your Bitcoins to the liquid federation. In the case of Ark, Ark has a trust minimized model on par with Liquid, really, where every user and participants have unilateral exit. And so the cool thing really is like is that down the line, as more and more people are adopting Ark as their sort of backend infrastructure for Lightning, well, we're able to offer basically trust minimized, call it trustless swaps or whatever through Bolts, which again is a non-custodial service. All of this are atomic transactions, and so we think that even without reaching the point where Ark becomes sort of like this ubiquitous retail payment protocol that's integrated into wallets, we think the first step and the most practical one is to help existing Lightning infrastructure kind of like optimize the cost of their operation, which will have consequences in terms of the UX that they're able to provide and ultimately the cost. And so we're kind of like almost also not praying, but like kind of like hoping that maybe like some other degen moment comes around the corner where fees are going a little higher than they are today, and we're able to validate the thesis. But yeah, ArkNode is probably what I'm hoping to introduce to the people at the OpNext event next month.
Yeah, I feel like you kind of like in 2 minutes kind of pitched the high level everything of Ark. So I'm gonna roll it almost all the way back. So let's like try to start, I guess, at the beginning here because
Mhm.
because I don't know if the listeners like intuitively know what like trust minimize means or even a federation, but beyond those things, let's just go into you've got Ark Labs, which is the private company you guys are building cool stuff on the Ark protocol. Let's just, if you can, try to explain and kind of walk me through, handhold me through like the high level understanding of what the Ark protocol is.
Right. I've been practicing a couple of different pitches over the last week, especially specifically in Amsterdam, and it's interesting because depending where people are coming from, there are some analogies that work pretty well and others that don't. But
We could try
given
we
the,
could try two or
get,
three different analogies.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
okay, let's start out. Let's imagine that a degen got this far in the episode, 8 minutes, and they're like, I don't know what any of this is. It seems like marketing language. What is Ark? Why is it why is it actually a well engineered and designed idea?
Yeah, well, I mean, if I'm talking to DGen, probably the analogy that I'll make is think of a roll-up where you have a single operator that is sequencing off-chain events and transfers, and eventually batching them into the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, Ark is obviously different than rollups in the architecture, because Ark uses a shared UTXO model. And so what happens is we're actually almost kind of like creating this sort of like proto chain of UTXOs. And so you know how normally you would have a blockchain, obviously, where you're stuffing transactions into block, you're chaining those blocks together. What we're actually doing is we're stuffing transactions into UTXOs, right? And the way we're able to do this is that we get a bunch of people together to create this transaction that creates a single Bitcoin output on chain. But this Bitcoin output, through the magic of Taproot, has a Merkle tree where every leaves on that Merkle tree essentially belongs to every user that participated in the creation of this on-chain output. And so it is a round-based protocol, right? And so periodically, whether it be like every 10 seconds or every minute, a bunch of different users collaborate to be able to create an on-chain output. And it's an n-event signature, because what we're trying to do here is we're basically trying to emulate a covenant. And where covenant get into the conversation is this idea that, within this Taproot tree, within this Merkle tree, there are different spending conditions. So we want to make sure that all of those outputs that are within the single on-chain output can only be spent in different ways. And this can only be achieved right now in absence of covenants by having every single participant within that output signing signing every part of that, Merkle tree. And so that's the part where we build, through the help of this server, of this operator, on-chain outputs. But the cool thing, again, also is that we're able to trustlessly swap our shares of this UTXO with any other participant in Ark, or even anyone that we care to send our share to. And that happens through the magic of connector output. And connector output, I think this is something that we'll be talking a whole lot more about. And connector output, for those that are familiar with BitVM, is actually an integral element within the BitVM construct. And I think the simplest way to explain it is by presenting how an Ark transaction would normally work, right? And so what I do when I send a virtual UTXO, meaning my share of the shared output, I want to send it to you, Charlie. What I do is I actually don't send it. I don't send you that specific share. What I do is I tell the operator, I'm going to give you my share of this output only if you create a new output on chain that will include a share that goes to Charlie. Now, obviously, in normal times, you'd say, well, then you're trusting the operator to be putting that new output in that goes to Charlie. But no, actually what happens is, through the magic of connector output, I can tell the operator, in this transaction where you're going to create an output that goes to Charlie, I want you to create this connector output. It's just just an additional output in the transaction that has a dust amount of Bitcoin, an irrelevant amount of Bitcoin. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that output as an input to the transaction where me, Alex, I'm giving you, the operator, my share of the virtual UTXO. And so if you link the two together, what happens is, unless the transaction where the operator gives you, Charlie, some Bitcoins, and that transaction includes that connector output, unless that transaction is confirmed on chain, the transaction where I give the operator my share of the output cannot be valid, because it uses the new output that we created as an input to that transaction. And then therefore you create this atomic relationship between both transactions. And therefore, using that construct, you're able to use the operator as kind of like this interface, this sort of like trustless intermediary, to be able to facilitate effectively Bitcoin swaps between a limitless amount of people. And obviously, all of this is happening off chain and just gets batched into just single output.
It's
Um,
yeah, I I kind of keep zeroing in on this idea of shared UTXOs because this is where a lot of the scaling ideas come from that like actually make sense in the context of Bitcoin. And like the average degen knows what a UTXO is, and they're like, oh, there's only so many of these outputs you can fit into a block. And so like the pitch is like, okay, but instead of just your private key signing and unlocking that UTXO, there's like a bunch of people who can like leverage because of Merkle trees and cryptography. A bunch of people can use that UTXO. And then you can use this like thing called an Ark operator to coordinate like people going in and out. I don't really know how to. This is one thing that I think like this is where the degens run circles around us. They like reduce like complex ideas into reductionist explanations, and in a way it kills me, but also like I admire it at like the efficiency with which they just communicate the high level ideas.
I
um
mean, an interesting direction where like it maybe even like connects more with some of the degen audience is like if like one of the thoughts that we're entertaining is okay, well, what if we push Ark to its limit and make it kind of like even more so similar to rollups in the way that like they're trying to project their infrastructure where because right now, yes, we're talking about a single Ark operator. What's the job of this operator? The job of this operator is basically to build the basically to design the tree, the Merkle tree that is going to be used to create those new outputs on chain, right? So he talks to a bunch of people. Everyone tells him, okay, I want to send a transaction. He's like, give me your register your output, your virtual output, collects a bunch of virtual output, and then where do you want to send it? And then he creates this tree. Okay, well, this guy wants to send it to Charlie. Okay, here's adding a leaf to going to Charlie, adding a leaf going to Bob, Alice, and whatnot. So the operator kind of like builds this transaction graph. And then there's another party, and there can be another party. Right now, it's all the same operator, it's all the same server. But there can be another party that is basically an open market and says, well, I have some Bitcoin laying around. Let me fund this output. Let me use my liquidity to be able to fund this output on chain, and therefore I'm able to probably earn a yield because okay, I'll get some I'll get some transaction fees of that. Uh, and so you kind of like can have this separation of concern, and it's almost kind of like becomes almost kind of like this builder. You can use kind of like the same terms like this builder because the builder is the one in rollups that is or in Ethereum that is kind of like building those blocks almost. Here the builder is building the tree, and then you have someone that funds it, that's putting it on chain, and you can have it be like super resilient because once you eliminate this perhaps a single point of failure of the Ark operator, you can have multi-party protocols, but that's down the line. That's down in the future. But this is maybe something that might excite the crowd. I think that is listening to your pod,
yeah.
especially when I say
So
yield.
yeah, I mean, look, it's a dirty word, but it's also an attractive bootstrapping. We talk about this all the time. Um, so like, okay, but the existential question, like, why? Maybe this is self-evident to you, but a lot of people are like, why? Why can't we just use Bitcoin L1? Like, what do I need an ARC for? Like,
Mhm.
why
I,
can't
I,
I just pay my coffee in Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think I mean, I think the original kind of like idea with shared UTXOs, you want to scale the amount of people that are able to, effectively own or at least have control and unilateral control, so like self-custodial access to Bitcoin, right? And we know that Lightning does not exactly do this. Lightning allows us to scale the amount of transfers that we can do while we're in possession of, because Lightning, you need a UTXO to be able to open channels. And we know that it's very unlikely that we get to a point where every single person on the planet owns their own respective UTXO. And so an interesting model when considering Ark is, well, maybe Ark is kind of like a UTXO renting service, right? So you have someone
Ooh,
that funds.
that's a good line. That's a really good line. I like that.
It's kind of like you have someone that funds a UTXO on chain, and then you'll pay the Ark fee to be able to have your little apartment on the leaf of that Merkle tree, where you're able to use that a part of that UTXO to be able to do whatever Bitcoin thing that you want to do, and that goes from simple transfers. From maybe opening a channel, we're looking at, we call them virtual UTXOs. So there's no reason why you cannot have virtual channels. There's no reason why you cannot do virtual PSBTs, virtual swaps. So there's a whole kind of like rabbit hole of, okay, well, we're Lightning scales. So like Lightning scales vertically. Ark allows us to scale horizontally and really add the amount of users that are able to have self-sovereign control over Bitcoin. And we think that not only is that helpful for payment, but this is really kind of I made this analogy earlier today to someone, but I think Lightning uses this unilateral exit security model for payments very well. I think Ark is able to scale this unilateral exit model to every other use case where you might want to be able to, leverage UTXO based scripting and things like this. So we're only starting to scratch the surface in terms of like what you're actually able to do within an Ark, because we are confident that those are not only strictly payments. Where payments fit within Ark, it's going to be a sort of like a journey to figure out what types of payments are optimal within Ark and what others might be better left off to Lightning or eCash and whatnot.
Bitcoin Season 2 is brought to you by Botanix. Botanix Labs is pioneering a new direction for DeFi with the first EVM L2 running on Bitcoin that's built to be forward secure, decentralized, and share gas fees generated by the network with users. See the future of DeFi at Botanix. botanixlabs.xyz. At the top of the episode, you said like there was initial kind of explanation and pitch for what Ark was a while ago, and I was one of those people who like tried to understand some of the videos, and I just really didn't. But then over the past few months, I've started to really wrap my head around it. It is much more interesting and seems way more feasible and communicable to me. So this is where I get into the questions of like, okay, so Ark is a protocol, and we've got a scheme for it. And I got to try out like a Signet, I believe, implementation in Amsterdam last week. But you've got a private company and you're developing ASPs or tools for Ark, but like where does the Ark protocol stand right now? Like, is this something that is like is this an ongoing development of the protocol, or what does that look like? I know like Lightning is still continues to be developed.
Yep.
Like where is Ark in this like development path?
Well, that's where Ark is kind of very unique, or even Lightning in itself is very unique in the sense that Ark does not require standardization across implementation. Ark is a much more flexible construct, and that's why I've been kind of almost shying away from calling it a layer two or anything like this, because I look at Ark as sort of like this primitive, it really is kind of like a multi-party contract on chain that allows users using a trust minimized coordinator to be able to optimize effectively any sort of like on-chain operation that they're typically able to make on-chain. And therefore, the question is, well, what do you want to use it for? And this is why, we're starting to see different implementations. Obviously, there's Steven's team at Second that announced a couple of weeks ago. There is a new team that is supposedly working on their own implementation out of Asia or China, which I think is very interesting. And it's going to be, again, like I said, it doesn't require. The cool thing with Ark is, unlike Lightning, those implementation do not require compatibility effectively, right? The only compatibility that they need in terms of like networking is being able to send payments from one another, and that can be done on chain or through Lightning. And we think Lightning is probably the ideal scenario there. So really, Ark offers this very fertile construct where who knows where people are going to take it. Certainly, the one thing that's for sure is that the original sort of framework that was proposed is only one of many, 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 where the variables within Arc, well, like I said earlier, those rounds they happen periodically. Okay, well, do you want to make that 5 second, 10 seconds, uh, 10 minutes? That's going to vary quite a bit depending on your use case. And I'm gonna quickly mention how we're doing it, for example, with the Arc node, because this is also going to touch on a subject that people always bring up with Arc, which is like, the liquidity issue, right?
I was
Is this
gonna ask.
idea,
That was gonna be
right?
my
Well,
hard question for you. You're just going right to it. Yeah.
well, exactly. So, one of the concept with Arc, as we've been mentioning, is this idea that you have an operator that is funding every on-chain output with his own liquidity, meaning that whatever amount of volume is being transferred over into in between Arc rounds, that operator has to come up with the money to be able to put that on chain. And so people have been doing a bunch of different calculations, but based on, perhaps some of the original design, and have figured out, well, that number, that liquidity requirement, it goes up very, very quickly. I would say in general, we think that's a non-problem. We think that whenever there's a need for liquidity in the market, there'll be people that will be happy to serve that liquidity if they're able to get a yield for it, right? But obviously, there's some scenarios where if you're using the most stupid implementation and not optimizing for anything, well, I mean, the numbers get so ridiculous that, like, you need every single Bitcoin on the planet to be able to like use Arc. But that's not necessarily the case, right? Because, okay, the original design was 4 weeks where the Arc liquidity would be tied up for every round. So the operator would need 4 weeks to be able to eventually sweep back the Bitcoin and be able to reuse that to fund new rounds. 4 weeks is quite a long time, but the 4 weeks is because the original design was for people that are retail users to be able to basically come back online, right? Because the idea with Arc is then you have this timeout, your funds might expire and then go back in, so like more like a custodial mode. And we don't think that operators are going to start running away with people's money. That doesn't really make sense. But certainly you shift the trust model once your fund expire. And so you need to have this period where you give someone that goes on vacation enough time to come back and like refresh their virtual UTXOs. But that's only for the mobile retail use case, right? That's only for people that want to use it in their like mobile app. If you're running a Lightning node and you have an online server that's online all the time, you're never going offline and coming back. You're always online, and therefore you can very, very quickly and you can shrink the period of time where the VTXO has to be refreshed. It doesn't matter if you make it 24 hours, right? Because the server is always going to be there. So just before it expires, the server that's attached to the Lightning node is going to refresh the UTXO. So you switch, you move the liquidity tie up from 4 weeks to 24 hour. Can be 3 days, can be 1 week, right? So a lot of ways to optimize this liquidity, a lot of different transfer models within Arc that don't require as much liquidity. Things like out of round maybe we don't have to touch on this right now, but no, we
Well,
really
this is
think that
yeah,
this
you've
is, yeah.
already skated you've just skated to where I was like, I'm gonna try to ask Alex some like hard questions because I don't normally do this to my Bitcoin season two guests because I typically don't think that they're like prepared, nor am I prepared. But I was like, okay, Alex like knows the whole scope of Bitcoin. He's comfortable with like hard questions because I know you like you really want to like you really want to try to figure out like what actually works and be intellectually honest about it. ASP user out of round transaction collusion. Are
Mhm.
you I was looking at this as a as a criticism of Ark. um could you kind of explain what this is and then what the level of concern or mitigation might be?
Yeah, I mean, this boils down to the idea that there are different ways to basically transfer um, those virtual UTXOs. There are ways that are more trusted, and there are ways that are trustless. But the out of round proposal is this idea that, well, basically, if I want to send you over my virtual UTXO, but we don't want to do this this round cooperation thing because there's some interactivity here. It's a little more expensive, right? Because it requires additional liquidity from the operator. What I can do is I can basically say, well, hey, this output that I own, make it so that Charlie can spend it with you actually. So I co-sign with the operator, and we add a spending condition. Basically, we pretty much add a spending condition to this output in the shared UTXO where it says if Charlie wants to spend it with you, the operator, he can do it, and therefore I don't own it anymore. But what happens is that because of the way that this is designed, it resembles sort of like what people have been calling like the state chain model, which is that until you actually settle the it's I wouldn't call it an IOU, but until you actually use your ability to spend that virtual UTXO and include it into a round, you don't have this sort of like ability to unilaterally control it in a way where in a scenario where the operator is malicious and I'm malicious, we can actually double spend you. We can say like, oh well, Charlie, you thought you had it, but actually I'm going to sign it again with the operator, and we're going to have it be Bob. It's now, and now Bob can spend it and not you anymore. um, so it's a question of whether or not, and I think the cool thing here is that you always kind of like leave it up to the user to be able to decide, or at least I think both implementations at the moment are kind of like working along the same line, which is that originally when you receive your Bitcoins on Ark, you are effectively being transferred an out of round transfer, because this is more efficient for senders, because you don't want senders to have to join rounds, because then it's like, okay, I'm trying to send Bitcoin. Okay, wait, I have to wait for this round to happen where there's coordination with a bunch of people. This is a little bit too inefficient, poor UX. So it's like, okay, well, we're gonna do this out of round thing. The recipient is going to get this out of round virtual UTXO, and then the recipient can decide, okay, well, maybe I want to be sure that it's completely trustless right away. I'm going to put it into a round. Or you can be, well, I trust Charlie or I trust the operator. Maybe I'll cycle it. Maybe I'll refresh it in a week from now. Or you can actually send it over to someone else yourself as well. And you can create those chains. So it's not that this is sort of like an inherent property of Ark that makes it so that it's trusted. It's more so that, again, there are different optimization that you can use to, make better use of the liquidity. Obviously, you can imagine that those out of round transfers are going to be cheaper than actual in round transfers. And it's all a matter of, okay, well, what kind of security model does the user wants to have? What is he more comfortable with? Certainly the state chain model, in our opinion, is more secure than straight custodians. So you're already getting a lot of you're already gaining a lot of benefits there. And then it's up to you on how you're going to use Ark. And I think this is where, again, The great thing about it is we don't have to come to come to some sort of consensus or standardization and to have kind of like all of these working groups to figure out what's the best way to go about it, because it is not the same type of model of layer two as Lightning is. We'll just have different people working towards their own way and kind of like, let a thousand flower blooms.
That's actually a very underrated. To me, that's one of the more underrated things which I had not considered about Ark, which makes me much more optimistic on it as a feasible implementation. Because in my head, I'm going like, okay, I got to pre-sign transactions. Are pre-signed transactions pragmatic? Which we could go back and forth on. But the fact that you can have a bunch of implementations and everybody can just like build it their own way is to me, I mean, if we look at like a lot of what's fraught with existing Bitcoin consensus and Lightning and other types of systems, like it's so much it's almost like less about like exactly what they decide and more about just the ability to coordinate. And this reduces the friction of coordinating at the protocol level. I don't know, I'm talking out loud. Does this resonate with you at all, or is
Yeah,
this kind of an angle? Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, 100%. I mean, I one of the reason why I joined Ark Labs is the fact that those guys decided that there was something there with potential, and they wanted to act on it. Right? They decided, okay, we're going to build this thing, and maybe we're going to figure out that it's broken in the end, and certainly it probably is not perfect. Because Ark is the first iteration, it is the first implementation of this concept of shared UTXO, which is a concept which is, an iteration of the coin pool design, which was proposed a long time ago. It's an iteration of the channel factory design. So they're all sort of like all of these proposals that have come true over the years, where people, as you said, have been kind of like a lot of times in committees trying to optimize and design the most perfect fail-proof protocol. And this attempt to, protect users and, protect against every single edge case, considering the fees or what's going to happen when you unroll all the tree on chain and all of this, it just creates inertia. It just leads to complete inertia where no one is actually willing to put any effort or any resource towards actually building anything, because everyone else is going to tell them, well, you're being reckless. Maybe this is not the right thing to do. Maybe if we wait long enough, we'll have a better way to do it, which again is kind of like it's a great parallel with the covenant conversation, which has been the exact same story, right? It's kind of like this quest to ever optimize every potential use case. And certainly, I mean, to be fair, the covenant conversation is a bit of a different one, because obviously it affects Bitcoin consensus. You're talking about having every single node. So it certainly deserves quite a lot more rigor. But no, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I'll be the first one to say, and Marco and the whole team are going to be the first one to say, we don't have all of the answers. We don't know what's going to happen when 10,000 people are using Ark and like it explodes and everyone's trying to go on chain. But we're trying to get to 10,000 people using Ark because we think that by then we'll probably be able to work out like kind of like pretty neat solutions. And if we get like that type of traction, it's going to warrant more people and more mind share working towards those solutions. But if you never get traction, if you never get product market fit, it's like, why are you ever going to justify throwing a bunch of money, throwing a bunch of brain power to all of those ideas? You're not. So no one moves. And so, no, I'm pretty excited about like just getting the ball rolling here. And yes, the fact that it's a neutral protocol that anyone can use and create their own design around is going to be, probably one of the reasons why it wins. Simple things are the ones that end up winning because they allow creative minds to again, iterate until we reach something that is actually practical, right?
Yeah. Yeah, very well said. And because you brought up covenants and general Bitcoin protocol and consensus discourse, I'm going to take it there. First, as it applies to Ark, like because Ark is UTXO sharing and dependent upon UTXO based scaling and extension, what might covenants do, various types of covenants,
Mhm.
do for an Ark implementation?
Mhm. There are a couple of things that it can do. But first off, it's very important for people to kind of like get rid of this idea that we need covenants for Ark, or that like Ark without covenant is something to not pay attention to. That was one of the unfortunate premise of the original conversation that I think led people to not pay attention to it, not dedicate resources.
Myself
So
included. I was like, "Oh, sounds like we need like
yeah,
covenants to make this
yeah.
work." I was like, "I'll file it over here for later." Yeah,
Exactly, exactly. So there's a couple of things, optimization wise and UX wise and liquidity wise. So when I was explaining earlier, where you have this output and every participant in this new round has to sign all of those, has to sign the entire transaction, this N of N, right? The problem is in the absence of covenant, not only do the participants have to, they have to sign a lot of things. They have to sign the entire tree, the every part of the Merkle tree of transaction. They have to sign this, and that just creates more overhead. This just
and that's what I'm saying.
requires
The whole
more.
pre-signed transaction. Are people really going to sign all those transactions to get into the Ark?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think they will, because again, it's a matter of like what use cases are you targeting. But certainly, if you're talking about in the context where you have a 500, 1,000 user joining around, you're starting to talk about a lot of PSBTs going around back and forth between the operator and the user. And if you're running like a desktop interface with some desktop use case, maybe like an exchange or something like that, maybe that's not too bad because you're at home running off your desktop. You've got like a solid internet connection. It's not going to drop. And that's going to go over pretty well. Maybe it's going to take 5 minutes. Maybe it's going to take a minute. It's whatever, you kind of like trading or whatever, doing swaps. You don't care too much. If you're trying to send a payment or receive a payment and whatever, you're on your mobile phone, you're in the car, connectivity is like up and down and whatever. Well, if that fails, you have to join another route. So, the UX is not great. The more overhead you create in terms of like data that needs to be passed around participants, the more the user experience in general, it becomes affected. And so with covenants, well, we get rid of most of that. With covenants, you only need, all of the spending conditions are embedded into the script. So you basically just sign your part that only affects yourself, and you're good to go. So you're saving a lot of costs there, a lot of overhead in terms of backup for the user. It's a lot more straightforward. And the other opportunity with Covenant is, well, if we truly get sort of like powerful introspection, then you can start talking about schemes where you can improve the liquidity management. You can allow maybe the operator to get some of the liquidity that's committed into those outputs before the entire tree expires. And you can also, I think this is the most crucial part really, is where you start talking about um, schemes where you can optimize the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario being the user has to unilaterally exit on chain. And even worse is everyone needs to unilaterally exit on chain, or a bunch of people needs to do that. So how do you do that more efficiently? We know people have been doing research. We know that with covenants, with powerful scripting language, you're able to optimize that and significantly reduce the cost of on-chain transactions for this. So those are all great features. And obviously, if in the future we have millions of people using Ark, it's probably going to be prerequisite. But right now, as we're starting to grow the protocol and pick up product market fit, those are really not needed.
Yeah, build it today. What works? What can you do? There's many epitaphs and gravestones of companies who said, "Man, if we're gonna build towards this one soft fork, which is definitely gonna happen," and then it never happens, and all of that work just gets
For naught.
sidelined indefinitely. I mean, so let's pull back really far. What are your thoughts on the current discussion and consensus? Do you have many thoughts? What are your just some general commentary from Alex on this? It's
Yeah.
mid-November. Like, where's your head at on this right now?
Honestly, I'm not paying attention to it so much as I have in the past. And that is probably because, you know, the more I work on Arc, I realize that there is potential for us to optimize quite a lot of things that we have been doing on Bitcoin, using it in the wrong way, or kind of like really just optimizing on-chain cost. And who knows, honestly, like, when you talk to people that are interested in bringing covenants to the chain today, um, there are different use cases that are being brought up, but certainly people, at least within the crowd of people that maybe are listening to your podcast, a lot of them are wanting to optimize, swaps of within those meta protocols, within runes or whatnot. And we think that like there might be ways where this can be done without soft forks, and that because we're still exploring this idea, and again, it might not be us that builds this, but there's an inkling, there's a hunch that, well, actually, if you have this protocol that is generalized and that allows you to effectively really optimize your on-chain transactions, and Arc virtual UTXOs are UTXOs, you can do again virtual PSBTs, and well, who knows, maybe you can actually stitch a meta protocol on top of Arc, and therefore all of the slow-fi stuff, well, maybe actually becomes, you know, proper DeFi stuff. And again, it's probably not something that we're going to build ourselves, but we think that there's ideas out there where, a lot of the people that, because we see kind of like this proliferation of, this bridge list, those bridge list things where you kind of like require on-chain execute, it's like you require on-chain calls of some contracts that's going to be executed on some other layers and whatever. I don't really pay attention too much to the details of that, but again, my hunch is that, well, if you're requiring on-chain transaction, you're going to be running into a wall every now. It's not only going to be like slow fi, it's eventually going to just completely collapse under the
Yeah,
weight
it's
of
gonna
the
become
very, very scarce.
stalled
Yeah.
fi. It's not just slow. It's like
Yeah,
hilariously slow. Yeah.
exactly. So how are you maybe able to do that and using the same principle, using the same UTXO based constructs, but move this off chain? And perhaps the usual suspects are going to hate that I'm talking about stuff like this, but wouldn't this be like the best thing to ever happen if you're a Bitcoin maxi as well? There's a potential for all of these operations to actually be moved off chain, and everyone gets to have their cake and eat it too, because you're not making the compromise of bridging to another layer with a different trust model. You're actually using, pre-signed Bitcoin transaction, but just in a way that are much more optimal. So, not saying that we're going to come up with some cat VM competitor tomorrow, but it's a nice. It really is a. I think like I said earlier, a very, very fertile idea where I think a lot of people, and hopefully people that are listening to this will take it somewhere, because again, all we want to do is being able to validate the notion that Arc is this very versatile construct that can be plugged into all pieces of Bitcoin infrastructure to just optimize the user experience and the cost for everyone.
I mean, to the Bitcoin maximalist, the five of the laser eyes who still listen to the show out of spite and who've made it to the end of our conversation. What I hear is that I can do ordinal theory on Ark probably, and that I can do all of these, all of my degenerate stuff on Ark, and it's got similar, or in fact close to identical trust assumptions as doing it on chain, but I don't have to burden all the poor L1 plebs with my degenerate transactions.
Exactly, but I'm more so hoping that it is the degens that are actually building stuff that hear
Yeah,
this because, well, the maxis. I mean, I love them, and I say that in jest, but
I do too. Like
I'm much,
yeah. I mean, like
yeah.
I the thing is, like, yeah. I mean, I clearly don't publicly project hardcore Bitcoin maximalists anymore, but like that's a big part of me personally, and that's where I come from. And I think if we entirely lose sight of this like dogged adherence to certain like things about Bitcoin, that could create a very monstrous culture on Bitcoin. And so it's all about balance right now.
Oh, exactly. No, we're getting away from that, and I think the ecosystem is a pretty healthy state. I'll throw you a alley hoop here, but I think in terms of covenant conversation and whatnot, certainly what I'm most excited about is picking up on everything that I might have missed out on at the OpNext conference next month. I think you've got a killer lineup of speaker and some very very interesting conversations going to happen there.
Thank you, man. We've worked hard to try to make it a very broad and compelling programming. Like, I mean, you've been in Bitcoin for many, many years. You've talked to most of all these people. You participate in all these discussions. And like, I don't know the last time like all of these different people were in the same room together. I
Mhm.
think it's been kind of a long time since we've had such a like such a conference where we're gonna talk about Bitcoin scaling, and we're gonna try to entertain wide perspectives from like very important legitimate stakeholders and people with good insights. So thanks for the alley oop, Alex. I'll throw one back to you. I mean, so where does Ark go from here? Where do people learn more about it? What's next? Where do I look towards over the next few months?
Well, arklabs.to to follow up on our progress, or arklabshq on Twitter. We are expecting to release the Ark node at least in alpha, or so like a beta version of it to um, select amount of people. If you want to be part of them, if you actually are running Lightning operations, if you're currently doing swaps, if you're running into issue, rebalancing your channels. I know right now on-chain fees are generally cheap, so probably you don't have too much of a headache. But looking forward or looking backward to times where fees were an issue, we want to know about how you've been dealing with this stuff, specifically if you use LND at the moment, which is what we're building this off of. Yeah, we want you to be able to try out our solution. We think it's going to be honestly a game changer for the Lightning ecosystem. And again, we're going to start from there, and then we're going to iterate because, there are just so many options, so much opportunities, we think, to implement Ark into different aspects of the infrastructure. So if you have other ideas, please reach out to me. I'm at BurgeAlex4 on Twitter. I'm sure that'll be in the show notes anyways.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah, don't reach out to the other three Burge Alexes on Twitter. Uh, well, I'm just Alex. I'm so glad you're finally on Bitcoin Season 2. I have followed you and your insights for many, many years, and it's kind of crazy to come full circle to talk to you on my own podcast. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you at OpNext and many future IRL Bitcoin conferences and meetups to come.
Absolutely
Cheers.
appreciate you, buddy. Cheers.